Now I want to move from the basic consumer problem that we had before. We were maximizing a utility function subject to a budget constraint, to instead of having kind of like a fixed income, Y, you're endowed with a given quantity of good 1 and good 2, which you can buy and sell at the same price that you consume the good. So the new budget constraint, we'll erase that old one, the new budget constraint will look like, P1x1 plus P2x2 equals your endowment. Your endowment we'll call omega 1 and omega 2. So how valuable is that endowment? It's P1 omega 1 plus P2 omega 2. And so with this budget constraint, omega 1 minus x1, if that's a positive number, you have more of good 1 than you're going to consume. So that means you'll be a net seller of good 1. If it's a negative number, you're consuming more than you're selling. So you're a net consumer of good 1. How are you going to be able to finance that net consumption? Well, you're going to have to sell good 2. So you can't be a net consumer or net seller of both goods. You're going to have to kind of sell some of one in order to get access to the other. Put another way, then the I guess that's the net sales of good 1 has to add up to be the same as the opposite of the net sales of good 2. All right, so that change in the problem really doesn't change anything for us. I've effectively just written, this new expression in place of y, but y, though it's a letter, is just a character. I could have instead, made it a picture, like a little smiley face, and now I've replaced the smiley face with P1W1 plus P2W2. So it doesn't change the problem at all, other than conceptually now we have this other interesting element to this unchanged problem, which is that we have an ability to talk about whether or not you're a net seller or net consumer of these two goods by contrasting the endowment, W1, omega 1, omega 2, with your actual choices, X1, X2. So the problem hasn't changed. We just have this extra other thing we can talk about. Taking our endowment income problem and presenting it graphically doesn't change the problem, other than we have, an extra new interesting element as well, which is we have some point that reflects our endowment of each good, omega 1 and omega 2. Now, obviously, our budget line is going to have to run through that point because that's the income that we have. Rearrange that budget constraint and we can find our x-intercept. In the event that you were to not consume any x1 and sell all of your x1 off to just consume x2, how much x2 would you have? Well, you'd have your endowment of x2, and then you'd have what you were able to transform your x1 into x2s, which of course depends on the marginal rate of transformation. And so that gives you your kind of intercept on the x1 axis. While I can draw a line through 2 points, I don't actually need to get the x1 axis solution now, but just go ahead and draw my budget line. But for completeness, we can note that the intercept on the x-axis is going to be how much good one you can have in the event that you know, eat all of the endowment of good one you have, and you transform all of that good one, all of that good two you have into good one. There you go. So that gives you your x-intercept as well. Now, since nothing's changed, you already have the toolkit through which you can figure out what the consumer choice is here. We have our preferences that have some utility representation, and that's a little indifference curve that depends on good one and good two. And we have some choice of how much good two to consume and how much good one to consume based on our preferences, where our margin rate of substitution equals our margin rate of transformation. So in this instance, we are a net seller of good one and a net buyer. Sorry, a net seller of good two and a net buyer of good one. And so the problem hasn't changed, but because we have these endowments and we're trading, we get to have this extra language to talk about our position relative to our endowment. Now let's ignore this endowment point omega 1 and omega 2 for just a second and remind ourselves that, in the event that, say, the price of good one falls, we feel richer, and there's also a behavioral change that isn't driven by feeling richer, but also by just purely the relative price change. And last time we saw how to draw it, kind of like we have illustrated here. And we did Hicks and Slutsky decompositions. Let's just do this Slutsky decomposition here. I'll draw it in red. We're going to go through our old consumption point A, and at these new prices. That looks pretty good. Am I on target? Yeah, I'm pretty, we'll call it a straight line. And our preferences look like they would have been something like this. So we would kind of move from A to C as we hold our income fixed and just look at the relative price change. That's our substitution effect. And then our move from C to B is our income effect. Now, this is wrong in this case, okay? And the reason why it's wrong is because of the fact that the other thing this price change is doing in this instance is it's changing our endowment. So there's an income effect based on what we used to consume before, right? That's the thing that got us from C to B, feeling richer given that the price of good one fell. But now there's another income effect, which is we were endowed with good one. It is less valuable. Therefore, while we might feel richer because we used to consume good one and it got cheaper, we were endowed with good one, so that fall in price is making our endowment less valuable. So in this particular case, the kind of consumption and endowment income effects are going to move in opposite directions. So how do we draw the endowment income effect? The key difference here is the line won't rotate from X2 like in the classical price change, but it will rotate through the endowment point. So we still have this endowment at W2, W1, but with the new prices, if we were to get rid of all of our good one, since its price has fallen, we'd be able to afford less X2. So it's going to intersect the X2 axis lower. So our new budget constraint at these new set of prices rotates through our endowment. Maybe I should write that. Rotate through our endowment, which is omega 1, omega 2. Okay? That's the key difference here, is that we're now going to rotate through that. And, with these new prices, we will still wind up with some choice C. Okay. Now, how do we identify these different income effects? Recall how we did the Slutsky decomposition before. We identified the substitution effect by rotating the budget constraint through the old choice point so that we could take away enough income from people to feel so they didn't feel like they were richer or poorer from the price change, where they could afford that old bundle. So we're going to do the same thing here to identify the substitution effect. Point A is our original point. We got this new line. I'm graphically challenged, but not too bad. Look at that. That's pretty good. And so given our preferences, we'd wind up, why did I go? Let me actually just keep things consistent. I think before I was calling this B, and here I'll call this C. So this movement from A to C is, with this Slutsky decomposition, we've taken away enough income so that you can still afford to buy what you were buying before. And we're looking at, all right, what is the consumption choice that arises just because of this change in prices, your pure substitution effect? And so that is A to C, which is your substitution effect. Now for your ordinary income effect before, we were holding fixed your ability to buy, say, good 2 when the price of good 1 went down. So let's kind of define that in the same way. Let's hold fixed at your old point of intercepting the x2 axis. Maybe I'll make this yellow. And now at those new prices, so you could still afford the old x2 if you sold everything and went that way. At these new prices, okay, those are supposed to be, the yellow and blue and red lines are all parallel. And, we got our preferences. So your ordinary income effect is this movement from C to D. So we're kind of effectively holding your wealth constant, your real wealth in terms of how much X2 you could buy. We're holding that constant. We're looking at what decision you'd make on those new prices, holding that old real wealth constant. And then that shift from C, which was the price movement induced by just the price change, holding your real purchasing power constant. Now you move from C to D because you feel richer with that new price change. And then the last bit, this movement from D to B, that's, you're consuming less of each good. Why do you do that? Because you're poor. That is your endowment income effect. Okay, so what are the steps here? First, we identify a substitution effect. How do we do that? Well, we hold constant our ability to buy that original choice of goods A that we were buying. So our kind of real potential utility is held constant. But we look at what decision we make at those new prices when we're still able to afford A at those new prices. That gives us from A to C, our substitution effect. Now let's say we held our real income constant to what it was initially, meaning we can buy the same amount of X2 as we initially could afford to do. There we move from C to D. That is our ordinary income effect. But because we were endowed with good one, we're poorer here. So our actual choice is B, in that movement from D to B is the endowment income effect. All right, to kind of wrap this up, make sure we got our heads in the right place. I have some exercises to suggest. Since you're going to do all these graphically, it's easier. I kind of ended up in the corner for my endowment, which made it a little bit trickier to draw things. Maybe you want to be more in the middle of your graph. So let's have P1 increase. You've seen P1 decrease. Let's have P1 increase. Let's change P2 and P1 in both directions. I just did this with a Slutsky decomposition where we're moving through that original good bundle A. Do it as a Hicks decomposition where you're keeping that original utility constant. And then finally, let's just repeat all of this, not with X1 and X2, but instead with consumption in leisure, to tie into then the labor supply and schooling video that you should maybe take a look at after this. Hope this is helpful.